This one is very similar to Dead Bart, except worse. Like, grosser, I guess you could say. It's called Red Mist, or, well, I can't say the S word this early into the video, or YouTube might take it down. But once I get like 3 minutes in, then I think I should be able to say it. So this is Red Mist. I just wanted to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course, most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy for it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view new episodes days before they were aired. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had recently made a SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took longer for them to start up the new season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with Season 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back several months. Me and 2 other interns were sitting in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound designers for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be Fear of the Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch it. Now, given that this isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card, somewhat of an inside joke to us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles such as How Sex Doesn't Work and Rockabye Babblely, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles. When we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think of it more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays in as normal. The story begins when Squidward's practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he had a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy and Patrick. The Bubbles splash screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things begin to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is synced up with the animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finally finishes as if the skip never happened. There is a slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could very clearly hear the malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd with SpongeBob in the center of the frame, and he's booing too, very much unlike him. This isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is that everyone had hyper-realistic eyes. Very detailed. Clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of them looked at us, looked at each other, often confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes on to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is the night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is that at this point there's no sound, literally no sound, not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their statuses showed them working perfectly. He just sat there blinking in the silence for about 30 seconds, then he started to sob softly. He put his hands, tentacles, over his face and cried quietly for more than a full minute. All the sound in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through the forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself for a split second, then back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is the sound, and Squidward's sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes the sound was coming through from the other side. As good as the sound in the studio likes to have it, they don't purchase the equipment to be good enough to produce a sound of that quality. Below the sound of the wind and the sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched the show twice, so pardon me if it sounds too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed on the screen as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animator paused, editor paused, and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was the still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. His face was mangled and bloody. One eye dangled over his upturned face, popped. Ow. Ah, that's gross. He was lying on some pavement that was probably a road. I skipped a little bit, okay, because no one likes that. The most unsettling part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be for evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was still just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before, half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in hyper-realistic style, as if you could touch it and you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if there was a gale blowing through the forest. There was even sounds of snapping branches. The laughing, a deep baritone, lasted at longer intervals and came more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were, but he knew we had to. This time, the photo was what appeared to be a little girl no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barates, and a pool of blood next to her. I don't know what that... Let me look it up, actually. I'm curious. Barates... Oh, it's a... Oh, I'm stupid. It's a barrette. Her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out and popped. That's nasty. That's nasty. We're skipping that. Again, the body was on the street, and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I choked back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. After 5 seconds, after the second photo played, Squidward went silent as all sound. Like it was the scene started, he put his tentacles down and his eyes were now hyper-realistic like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and the most fear-inducing of all was his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind came back, and so did the deep-voiced laughing, and this time the photos lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. It's the same shtick. He went on. Okay, so basically, there's just 5 frames of dead kids. That's real classy. That's real great. The lead sound designer told us to stop, and he had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down there, and the editor just continued the episode. Only the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward was just looking at the viewer, full frame of his face, about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out, and a deep voice said, "Do it!" And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. Immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters the wall behind him and his bed, and he flies back with force. The last 5 seconds of the episode shows his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling from what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. The episode then ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demands to know what the heck is going on. Most people left the room at this point, and it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode a second time only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could have was that the file was edited and someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called and to analyze what happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited above by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for form and software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the timestamps may have been glitched and showed us the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened. To this day, nobody does. There was an investigation into the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified, no clues gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in the unexplainable phenomenon before, but now that I have something happen and can't prove anything about it before anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. That story was not very good. The dead kids was a bad touch. Bad touch. But, I guess it's popular enough, so whatever.